life. So transition from birth to 3 into school, transition from elementary into middle school into high school into post-secondary, and so on and so forth. We are always making transitions in our lives. So this is kind of focusing on one section of somebody's life who is tied to our agency based on eligibility. So, but keep in mind, there's a number of transitions that you can apply some of this information to early on. I always like to start our conversation about the mission of DDS, and the mission of our department goes back several administrations. Our current commissioner, Jordan Sheff, has maintained the mission that was put in place by a predecessor, 2 predecessors ago. And the mission of the Department of Developmental Services is to partner with the individuals we support and their families to support lifelong planning and to join with others to create and promote meaningful opportunities for individuals to fully participate as valued members of their communities. We here at DDS are responsible for doing a lot of planning with you, developing an administration of complete, comprehensive, and integrated statewide services for persons with intellectual disability and persons with a medical diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. Our vision is that all citizens supported by DDS are valued contributors to their communities as family members, as friends, neighbors, students, employees, volunteers, members of civic and religious associations, voters and advocates, and so much more. Live, learn, work, and enjoy community life in places where they can use their personal strengths, talents, passions, have safe and meaningful and empowering relationships, have families who feel supported from the earliest years through the lifetimes, have lifelong opportunities and the assistance to learn things that matter to them, to be able to make informed choices and take responsibility for their lives and experience the dignity of risk, to earn money to facilitate personal choices. You'll hear messaging about employment in one of our sister agencies as well, and know their rights and responsibilities and pursue opportunities to live the life that they choose. Now, how does one become eligible for DDS services? Well, many moons ago, as Laura mentioned, I've been with the state for a number of years. I know I have a colleague on this training as well who has more years than me. I'm not going to call them out, but way back when, before my time, you had to, and during my early years, you had to make a phone call to our Hartford office. And that phone call, you had to leave your name, your address, your phone number. And in doing so, you would then get a mailed application sent to your home. As time went on, now this is on our website. And this box here that you'll see with this green check box, a check mark, is right on our website. If you go to it and scroll down just a little bit, you'll see it to the left. That is a hyperlink box. You can just click on it and it'll bring you to a next prompt, which will give you 4 different options. You're applying for somebody coming out of birth 3, applying for somebody who has intellectual disability, formerly known as mental retardation, applying for somebody with autism. And then there's a 4th category, which is reactivating cases if somebody came out of state and such. But the bulk are coming out of the first 3 options for eligibility. To be eligible for DDS, you need to be a resident of the state of Connecticut. We do have folks who are coming in from out of state. Their families choose to start the eligibility process prior to even being here in Connecticut. But our eligibility unit won't take much action on that application until they have confirmation of proof of residency. So they just want to get the ball started. Our agency aware of that they're coming, but we can't make a determination on eligibility until they are physically here and confirmed residency. The individual needs to meet the statutory definition of intellectual disability, which is as defined by CGS, which is Connecticut General Statute 1-1G, which is a person may have a full-scale IQ of 69 or below, as indicated on intelligence and cognitive tests, and significant limitations in adaptive functioning that began during the developmental period, which is before the age of 18. And that's critical because when I talk a little bit about the autism services program under DSS, you'll see a difference with that age piece. As I mentioned earlier in one of my prior slides, a person who has a diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a medical condition, very rare, is automatically eligible for DDS services if they apply, regardless of the IQs. In my years, I've worked with 4 or 5 individuals who had that medical diagnosis, and not one of them had the IQ threshold of 69 or lower. They were all functioning well above that. That group also was pre-existed my days before starting with the state of Connecticut. So it's been a population here in Connecticut that was being automatically grandfathered in for eligibility. As I mentioned again, just to reiterate, prior to the age of 18, we have individuals we discover through a variety of different means that come to us later in life. We're looking for the documentation, the clinical reports, and all the other medical reports, et cetera, that are stamped when they were before 18. So 8 to 18 is that magic window. So they can apply when they're 30. If you have the records from that period of time between 8 and 18, and you're now applying at 30, 35, 40, that's great, because you have the records during their developmental period that you can submit with that application, and also provide some current information on top of that. Just bear in mind, school systems do not maintain records beyond 7 years. So if you are hesitant and don't want to apply, just be mindful regardless that those records go away from your town or municipality. So keep a good footprint for your loved ones, so that way if you ever state federal benefits or for state agency for eligibility purposes, you have that information. The application, we encourage, once you make a decision, once that individual makes a decision, once that family makes a decision, once the caregiver makes a decision, make the application. We know it's very difficult for some families to come to terms with the fact that their loved one might be eligible for DDS services, and we respect that. But the sooner that you apply and have an answer from us, we can become another resource to you for your loved one. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the resources for younger youth, and then some of the information about the 21 and over kind of things. But you don't have to use us. You can go through the application process and never touch base with us for a solid 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden we're back in your lives talking transition. And that's fine. Many families do that. All we ask is that you keep in touch with us so we know where you're at. You know, to say, hey, we moved from here to here. If you want to update our address and contact information, great. That's extremely helpful to us. As I mentioned, the application is online. This is our website here. This is what the picture down here shows, a little bit of what the screen kind of looks like now. As I mentioned, down to the left underneath the gray box is the eligibility. Once you click on that, you're going to get those 4 options. You're going to pick applying for somebody with intellectual disability, and it's going to bring you to another screen where it's going to have a fact sheet available. The application's in PDF. It's in English and in Spanish. The contact information for our eligibility unit is also there. There is videos in English and Spanish as well for the eligibility process. I believe it might be on the screen where the 4 options are before you get to the screen with the application. You just need to print the application out. It's about 11 pages in length, and the bulk of it is a checklist, 2.5 so pages for the actual application, and then you have HIPAA acknowledgement form, which needs to be signed and dated, and you have a number of releases built into that as well. The bulk of your materials are coming from your school district and your medical providers. That's what you're giving us as an agency. The application itself is only about 2.5 pages, and it's mostly demographic information, what you're seeking from us, any other agency involvement from the state, any other services you might be getting. If your loved one has autism, are you getting in-home autism services from another entity, et cetera. So again, right here, signed application, the signed HIPAA acknowledgement form. We're going to need a copy of the birth certificate, copy of all medical insurance. And we know many folks have private health insurance, some have Husky insurance, some may have a combo. So whatever health insurance that individual has over them, make copies of fronts and backs of those cards for us, please. Copy of the Social Security card. Last medical exam report. If you're applying as a student, we all have to get our kids those annual physicals to meet the nurses' expectations for your school. So that's easy. It's already been done. You're going to get additional medical records, obviously, if you have any specialties for your loved one, any psych, neuro, any therapies would be helpful information. Excuse me. We're looking for the last 3 IEPs from your school and the most recent triennial. Now, if you're applying younger, you may not have those last 3 IEPs. You might only have 1. You may have those initial testing, that initial battery of tests around the age of 8, and that's fine. If you're coming to us later on in their life, then having that most recent triennial is critical in the last 3 IEPs. You want to give us the last 2 triennials, give us the last 2 triennials. That's perfectly fine, especially if there's been a fluctuation in functioning. If they're 18 and over and you've gone through any legal processes for your loved one, we're looking for a copy of the court decree for guardianship or conservatorship. If you have power of attorney, if you have a health proxy, if you have a authorized supported decision-making document, whatever document that might be officially approved through a court or other means to help with decision-making of the individual, if you can get us a copy of that as well. As far as eligibility is concerned, it could take up to 2 to 3 months for an answer once we have a full completed application. So as long as everything is intact, they have everything they need, it takes about 2 to 3 months. And that could be very fast. You can get an answer within several weeks. And most of the time, it's about a 2-month window. It fluctuates based on the number of applications that are coming in. There's 1 eligibility unit, it's based in Hartford, and there's about 3 staff who work in that unit. So the flow of applications can dictate the turnaround time on the reviews. You will get a letter from the eligibility unit with their decision. If by chance you are denied eligibility and you feel that that was an incorrect decision on our agency, you can file for an appeal. We encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. It typically is about 60 days from the letter date that you need to file for that. And it could take a month to maybe even 3 to have your appeal heard. So the faster you respond to that, the faster it gets on the calendar for scheduling for a hearing. You'll get some information regarding the agency, and that may come directly from our eligibility unit. And more importantly, it's going to come from your region that you're assigned in. They will also reach out to you and get you some additional information post-eligibility determination. An important thing to remind folks is that we are a voluntary agency. We are not an entitlement. We are eligibility based. So unlike the school years that are mandated by law under IDEA, our services and supports available through DDS are not. They're not entitlements and are unfortunately at times dictated by the appropriations coming from the governor's office and the legislature and the state budget. So every budget cycle, we all get very anxious internally, worrying about what's going to happen to the agency and the funding. Are we going to get enhancements for graduates, or is it going to be a rescission? And are we dealing with not a full year of fiscal support? So every budget year, it gets a little stressful. But this year in particular, we're going into a new 2-year budget. So that's what Hartford is working on presently. I can assure you that our administration routinely advocates for the finances that are necessary for all the individuals coming out of school. And now that it's at 22, we're really targeting those transitions at that 22nd birthday and making sure the funding is available for each grad coming out at that time. This is a contact information for our eligibility unit. I'll leave this up for right now. Again, this is also on the website. After you do a couple clicks, it is on that same screen where the application is located. So I'll just sit there, let this sit for a minute. Okay, so now autism. My last couple of presentations, I had the fortunate pleasure of either talking before our colleagues over at DSS, or I knew they were coming at the following week to the same group. I don't have that liberty today, so I got to cover as much as I can for them. But about 8 years or so ago, the department started a pilot program for autism spectrum disorders. It began in New Haven area, 18 and over, for folks who have the autism diagnosis, who had IQs who were 70 and greater. So you can see the IQ line in the sand, 69 or lower, DDS, regardless of any other additional diagnoses. Autism spectrum disorder program was 70 IQ or greater with the clinical diagnosis of autism. So it did start under DDS. Several years ago, the legislature moved it over to DSS, the Department of Social Services, the same agency that runs Connecticut Medicaid program. Now, this is where you're going to see a little difference. And not only we have the IQ difference, but we also have the diagnosis has to be present before the age of 22 and expected to continue indefinitely. Okay, so there's that age difference that I referenced a little bit earlier. The person must have substantial limitations in 2 or more of the following life activities: self-care, understanding and use of language, learning, mobility, self-direction, capacity for independent living. I'm going to leave this up there for a few minutes as well. Contact information of Kathleen and Nate. They are 2 of the ASD resource specialists. They are phenomenal. They help anybody with any questions about the program, but also more importantly, those who are sitting on the waiting list. There is currently a waiting list for their services that last I knew 2 weeks ago after hearing them present at another group is at over 1,800 as we speak today. So they're hoping that the new budget, there's a commitment in there to increase their waiver capacity so they can get additional funds and start to begin to serve more and chip that number down and get that waiting list to manageable numbers. They do have a set cap for funding. All that information's on their website. If you go to our website and go to topics A to Z, which is in that little gray box, and go to autism, it will bring you right to their page. Okay, and there's additional information like this on this slide. It talks about a little bit of their services and supports, and it also talks about some of their funding caps per person. Now I'm going to get a little complicated because while autism was under DDS, we did all the eligibility. Now that it's under DSS, DDS does all the eligibility. So when it moved, they kept the eligibility component for our program and ASD's program under DSS, all under DDS. So one-stop entry for families and citizens of Connecticut to come in and make an application to DDS. If you don't know the answer of where my child's IQ is and where is their adaptive function make them fall in the scoring, they have autism. In addition, send us all the materials, including those autism clinical reports like CARS, ADOS, 2 examples. Include those. Check off both boxes. Applying for intellectual disabilities, applying for autism spectrum services. That gives our eligibility unit an opportunity to look at that applicant for both programs and determine which program is the most beneficial one based on their diagnosis and presentation. Okay, so DSS doesn't have the eligibility component built into their infrastructure. When it moved, our staff in that program went to DSS. When it moved, everybody getting services at that time went to DSS. When it moved, everybody on the wait list went over to DSS. So the entire program and all its contents went that way, except the eligibility component stayed with DDS. It helps so that way we are not turning down an applicant who could be eligible for the autism program. We're making that decision in-house for you as a family, for the individual, and for them, so that there's not multiple need. There isn't a need for multiple applications. Come to us and make a decision. You know which pathway your loved one's going to go, depending on which agency and with the diagnosis. Now I talked about the appeal process. You could appeal. You can be approved for DDS, intellectual disability services, and denied for the autism program. But you feel strongly that your loved one should be supported by the autism services program, you can appeal that decision because you were denied for the autism but approved for DDS. If it was in the reverse, you're approved for autism and you feel that your loved one is functioning lower and should be supported by DDS, you can appeal that decision. If you're denied by both, or for both, excuse me, you can appeal that decision. Okay, so there are appeal rights based on all those application outcomes. You cannot be approved for both programs. It's one or the other. Okay. Now,
there's this question on Facebook that speaks to this a little bit, so it's a clarifying question. If the IQ is under 69, a requirement still relevant if a child has autism, or is autism diagnosis a qualifying disability? So I believe they're getting at which path would they follow? Would they stay with DDS or go over to the autism waiver?
So in that situation, as I mentioned briefly, we have a number of individuals we support who have IQs or 69 or lower, and also have the diagnosis of autism. So they would be supported by DDS based on that IQ threshold and their functioning level based on adaptive behavior scoring, typically done through a Vineland. It's the youth, it's the citizens who have an IQ of 70 or greater who would be considered more appropriate to go to the DSS Autism Services Program. So based on that Facebook question, if their IQ is 69 or lower with autism and they applied for DDS and Autism Services Program, they would probably end up on the DDS intellectual disability track based on their IQ and presentation, regardless of that autism diagnosis. So,
Brian?
Yes.
We also have a question here in the chat regarding the autism waiver. Is there a minimum age or best age you recommend applying to DDS for the autism waiver?
Okay, so point of clarification is the Autism Services is under Department of Social Services. So you're applying for their program through DDS. So you'd be doing the application through us for the Autism Services Program. The program itself is 3 on up statewide. The age threshold, the geographic barriers that were early on in place are no longer. So when a family makes a decision for the application for DDS or for autism, or they don't know where their loved one stands with respect to our eligibility criteria, and they're making the application and checking off both boxes, as early as that family decides. The sooner the better, so that way we know who they are, where they're located, and we can do planning behind the scenes regardless of you using our services or not, or resources or not. So I'm going to hop off the autism topic. I just like to cover that because people often are looking for information regarding that. If there is additional questions, we'll be happy to answer those. If not, Kathleen and Nate, whose contact information was on that slide, I would encourage you to reach out to them. They're incredible resources to individuals and families in Connecticut when it comes to the autism program itself and what resources are in our communities. Now, if you're approved for DDS services, there are a number of different resources that you can tap into based on your choice, based on your need of your loved one and of your family unit. We do have respite centers. There's 11 centers statewide. There's soon to be 12. We're trying to get another one open in Meriden. But here in the West region, there's 4. Statewide, we're targeting reopening all our respite centers for the first weekend in June. They were closed due to COVID early on last year. We reopened them with lower capacities, and then we had to reclose them with the second wave of COVID. It wasn't because of exposure concerns or anything. Our public residential settings needed our staff. So we closed them up and redeployed our residential staff into our other public group homes and campus settings to alleviate some of the staffing concerns during the COVID spikes. So we're getting back in. We're going to start reopening these at the beginning of June. There might be some staggering differences between the regions based on staffing levels, but we're all going in with a 50% capacity and going to slowly increase that over the summer and get to 100% capacity. So we encourage you to look at that. If you are interested, your point of contact typically will be the helpline, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. They would be able to do the processing for your pre-visit and the referral for that. Or if you have a assigned case manager, you're already in our system, and you have a case manager assigned to you, they would be your point of contact to make that referral. With respect to our respite centers, there is no cost to families. All the staffing and everything is free. The transportation, the food, the utilities, all that is built into our agency budget. All we ask for families is anywhere between $50 and $75, depending on what activities they're going to be doing over the span of the stay. And that would be to cover personal expenses of the guest. So if they're going out to lunch or dinner or a movie, a carnival or an aquarium or whatever it might be, the personal expenses associated with that person attending that event we would be using the resources that you provide for that. If that's a hardship, you just need to let the center know, and we'll try to work around that and find the resources to assist with that. But you can be approved from Thursday at 4 o'clock until Monday at 10 a.m. for that stay. You can pick and choose what portion of that you want. You don't want any overnights, but you want 2-day visits. You just work with our center staff to make that happen and the scheduling. Okay. As a eligible individual for DDS services, you do have access to get a Camp Harkness Pass. It's a beautiful camp down along the coast in the greater New London area. Beautiful, accessible beach. There's a number of camps that are typically run there during the summer months as well, 2 or 3, I believe. And so if you're interested, you reach out to us and get that information. Jude might even have some information since she works in our southern region. Family grants. For many years, I ran this program in the West region. The program itself is now collapsed. It's centralized, so we have one manager overseeing the entire grant program for the state. There is an internal committee structure of representatives from all 3 regions to provide consistency when reviewing all the requests and approvals and denials or modifications. Each region has about $1.2 million a year to spend on family grants, and those go to individuals or families to help address disability-related expenses. We're going to make sure that insurances meet their obligation. We're going to ensure that schools meet their obligations or any other resources before we issue some grant funds. The bulk of the resources in our grants, when I ran the program, about 800,000 of that 1.2 million went to actual physical staff. Families like yourselves, finding a neighbor, somebody in your faith-based organization, an agency in your local area, maybe a para from the school, to pay for respite services to provide you relief. So a lot of that, the bulk of those resources are going to you as families to help cover expenses to care for your loved ones when you need a break. Maybe you have a family function to go to, and bringing them would be a health and safety risk for them. So that's predominantly what those resources are going to, but there's a total cornucopia of other things that it can go to, from additional therapies not covered by insurances to modifications, wheelchair ramps, technology. So we always are going to ask you if there's certain things that there might be somebody else responsible for covering. We're going to ask you for that additional documentation to validate that they've met their responsibilities before we'll entertain it. We know that Medicaid only covers certain things, and then you have to wait a number of years before you can get something replaced, like a stander or a lie or a wheelchair. But you might need a second one, or you might need something different for your program or to access your community, and insurance won't cover it because they met their obligation. That's something we can entertain. The committee does meet every 2 weeks, so they do review these on a quite regular basis. We are coming towards the end of our fiscal year, so it is crunch time to get any remaining dollars out the door. It's also summer camp conversation time, and it has been for a number of months. So a lot of the requests coming in have been associated with summer camps. Family support workers. About 3 years ago, I want to say approximately, our commissioner, we were able to get some resources from our legislature to help identify services that our agency needed to help minimize ER time and visits to the ER for individuals we support. So we use some of those resources after a number of stakeholder work groups and conversations to build a step-down unit, not physically build, but utilize an existing structure to do a step-down unit for folks coming out of a psychiatric admission who needed another layer in between going back home, going back to their residential setting or community setting. We also are looking at incorporating emergency transitional housing. We have 1 of 3 operational now. COVID kind of put the brakes on the other 2. We're hoping to get that re-jump started in the coming months. And the other component was our family support workers. They've been an existing resource. It's varied from region to region. My region in the West had more than the other 2 regions, staffing wise. but all 3 regions now are approved for 18 family support worker staff who are available to go into on referral and request family homes or individuals' homes in the community to help them access healthcare, medical appointments, food banks, whatever it might be, self-advocacy groups. We've done, I recently saw one of our family support workers help get somebody through their first and second COVID vaccine shot to make sure that they got it because of their compromised health system. It was really important to that family. So they can be used in a variety of different capacities. It really comes down to an individual need and identifying what that need is. Is it short term? They've transported to and from respite centers because not every family has means of travel. Excuse me. So they can be used in conjunction with one of our behaviorists to help implement some strategies in the family home, self-advocacy groups, other community inclusion activities, etc. We did pull them back during COVID, the first go around, and then we recently, before the second wave, they were still out on the road doing a lot of medical and health and safety related activities, and the bulk of the rest of their time was done still doing virtual activities. They've maintained self-advocacy groups virtually. They've done some great cooking to ADLs, to laundry, to cleaning. They've been able to use the computer to their benefit in working with the person in their own home virtually, working on enhancing different skill sets because they couldn't access the community or other locations to do a lot of those planned activities that they had built into the plan that they were working on with the individual. So they are on referral. There is 18. I can speak for my region. We are in the process of refilling a vacancy. One of our staff did take a promotion elsewhere in our organization, so we are backfilling that position right now. That's up in the Danbury area, but we anticipate that being filled in the coming weeks, if not a month. So it's a great resource. I'm actually just in one of our offices tonight coming live for you and cross paths with 2 or 3 of our staff here. And totally engaged. They're on their way. One was on their way out to go meet with somebody. So they are getting back out and doing more of the normal activities beyond the health and safety things that they were doing for most of COVID. As I mentioned, also, we have earlier, for those who weren't on, we do have 3 of our transition advisors on this call, 1 from each region. Each region is approved for 3 positions. I know the North region is actively filling one of theirs, and the South and the West region, excuse me, are at capacity. We each have our 3. So they automatically will start tracking, monitoring, and talking with families 18 to 22. Their height is going into the 18 and their height is the 21 to 22, but there's a lot of activity in between there working with individuals and families. They can come in as early as 16, 17 on referral. And who knows if the state law changes where that conversation about transition happens as early as 14 as it is currently for autism, and it goes regardless for everybody 504s, IEPs. We can have referrals as early as 14 if that's the case. But right now, referrals 16, 17, and automatically start working with families and individuals 18 to 22. It's going to take a different look per family. Some families are going to be very engaged and will hop on that, and other families are not going to be as engaged, and we might be knocking on their door as we're getting to 20, 20 and a half, 21 to really try to sort out where are they headed, or have they reached out to our friends at BRS? What is their life plan post-school after exiting on their 22nd birthday? I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those roles in a minute. We do have additional clinical team on our family support resource teams. This can take a different look based on the region you're in. Some of our regions have speech and language pathologists, some have occupational therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, behaviorists, and nurses. I can speak for the West. We have all those except for the PT. So you can make a request for these services. They are consultative services. These are not direct therapy or direct service providers, but they will come in and work with the team, look at what assessments have been done, maybe make connections in the community for additional assessments or other recommendations. Our psychologists are often engaged with redeterminations of eligibility. If you come into our system from birth to 3 or prior to the age of 8, when those first clinical reports can be captured by the district. You might be in our system as encoded ND, not determined. You'll get a letter from us that a redetermination needs to occur. Our psychologists here, each of the regions has one who would field those redeterminations. You don't need to reapply. It's just get us the identified clinical reports. They'll do a review on the local level. And if there's a second review needed, they'll send it to Hartford. So they play that role. They're often involved in our cases that are forensically involved, duly diagnosed individuals with mental health conditions who maybe have a higher functioning levels, and we're having difficulties with service planning and engagement. So they can get involved in a host of different situations. Our nurses, phenomenal. They also will make connections for medical providers in your community. Those who are living more independently might need a little more assistance from our nurses in managing some of those appointments and making sure following up on filling in prescriptions and so on and so forth. They may also go on the road and take somebody to a medical appointment along with one of our family support workers. So there's a lot of team collaboration with this resource team. Again, not all of these are available in all 3 regions with respect to those clinical resources. So definitely consult your region to find out what is available and how it might be able to be used for your loved one. I mentioned the helpline. This here is the regional breakdown with their toll-free numbers here in Connecticut based on region and their email addresses. The bulk of them are working remotely, just like most of our workforce still is. I would encourage you to do email versus voicemail. They might get the email faster than a voicemail. The helplines were set up about 8 years ago when we had a massive retirements and we had to reshuffle our case managers to ensure waiver compliance and other needs of the department. So these were set up to receive all individuals who don't have Medicaid but are eligible for DDS services. So they become the point of contact for those individuals and those families. And they can access everything just like somebody who's supported with a case manager in the local office. The helplines originally started out with about 1,500 families per region. On average, right now, we're floating between 22 and 2,500 families per region that are supported through the 3 regional helplines. So it's a large number of families that are triaged and guided and supported through our helpline staff on a regular basis. You come off the helpline if a case management resource is available in your community when you are able to get on the Husky C Medicaid benefit through DSS. That typically would occur after the age of 18. Okay. After you get through the helpline, your loved one is 18, they got their Medicaid, everything went well, we can entertain assigning a local case manager to your loved one. And they would be able to assist with completing service plan documents. You might get an individual plan, full or a short version to start. Completing a level of need assessment. You can look at that assessment on our website. If you go to topics A to Z, go to L and it'll bring you right down. Full transparency, you get to see the tool. You get to see the manual by which our staff have been trained on how to complete it. All your districts are very familiar with the tool. And actually there's several questions that we ask of the district with your approval and support, obviously, to get information about how your loved one, how the individual is functioning in the school. We try to do those on an annual basis. It might be less frequent early on with us, 18, 19, but once you start getting closer to that 22 and thereafter, once you have an annual plan, and services from us, that will be done on an annual basis at a minimum. If anything changes with the individual or the family unit, we can revisit that assessment, make those changes to see if the level of need scoring changes in any way. That tool is currently used to help provide some funding guidelines for the agency to promote some consistency in how resources are assigned. It's scored 1 to 8. There's not many 8s. So each of those have funding thresholds for day and employment services as well as residential services. Yes, there are folks who do need 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, or in some cases more than that. So we look on those cases on an individualized basis and review documentation that supports that need. And we'll look at assigning allocations that exceed what those caps would be. More conversation about that on an individual basis would happen with our transition advisors, helpline staff, or your direct case manager, whoever's involved in your immediate team from DDS. As I mentioned, we have two different planning documents. One is an individual plan short version. It's a short and sweet service plan. Often when you don't have annualized money from us to buy services, that's the tool that would be utilized. But many of you might get that initial individual plan, which is a larger document, once you're coming into our service point for at 22, getting that employment or day services funding from us and buying that program and securing those services from one of our providers. So that tool will come into play in your loved one's life further down the road. All our resources are reimbursable through Medicaid, so it is considered a home and community-based waiver program. So it is critical that they're on Medicaid Husky C, not only to get a case manager, but for us, our agency, to be able to assign finances for services. There is a public act which references that. So we cannot issue resources if the individual is not on Medicaid. So, and every year we have a handful of folks statewide who choose not to, can't enroll because of trust funds or whatever the circumstances might be. And we look at each of those cases on an individualized basis to see, can something be done to rectify that? If not, what is their plan? Are they properly supported? And try to make some decisions from there. As I mentioned, we talk about employment all the time. It's a huge message within our agency. We are an employment first agency, have been for a number of years. And we do believe that everybody can work and there is a job for everybody. Our staff are messaging that from the transition advisors all the way up through our case managers, through me as well, that we are pushing employment. Can the person's skill sets get them on the pathway to competitive employment? Have you contacted BRS? Have you spoken to them about adult voc rehab for your loved one post-22? Are they currently engaged with their Level Up program? So there's a lot of dialogue about employment and building the skill sets for employability throughout their high school life. Is their transitioning goals in their IEP promoting their success in community employment and being as independent and as safe in their community as possible, and not relying on state and federal programs, or not being just directed right into a large group day support option. So we are messaging employment regularly, have many success stories. And I encourage, if you want to go to our website, go to our Self-Advocates Corner. They have a bunch of employment idol videos. They may seem dated based on their year they put in print, but there's a lot of great success stories of folks who are out there working in the community, making minimum wage or greater and having meaningful experiences, and not relying heavily on state or federal benefits or their mom and dad or their caregivers, because they are bringing home a paycheck. So we will be messaging that. We want people to start thinking early as elementary at 22. How are these goals promoting their employability when they leave at 22? Or in some cases, we have many individuals who get jobs while they're in high school, just like individuals who don't have disabilities. They're getting jobs in high school and carrying those jobs after high school. So it's getting on that mindset that building skill sets early on only help with the independence, only help with self-care, only help with employment and accessing their community safely. So just again, the employment is a big conversation in our world on a regular basis. Other types of services and supports from a day and employment focus that we do have available: individualized supportive employment, which is in alignment with competitive employment. We do have an individualized day support service. One is called IDV. It's a vocational focused one. And we have one as IDN, which is a non-vocational focused one. That is, I hate to use the word more one-to-one, but it is individualized. It's not facility based. So it would be somebody coming in, working with them right out from their home and going and engaging in the community. The vocational one tends to be used often where somebody doesn't meet the service definition for competitive employment. They need more support hours based on the number of hours they're working, but they need more support on the job than what the definition for competitive employment allows. So we use that service to give them the extra support in that community-based job with an employer in getting that minimum wage or greater employment. So we beef up the enhancement around the staffing support based on their level of need. Then hopefully over time, we'll be able to fade it back as they build their skill sets and increase their independence and possibly build natural supports at that job site. Another program is called our group day supports, often known as GSEs or group supportive employment. Those are a lot of our work crews that our providers run. Many are lawn-based, some are janitorial-based. We do have some GSE programs that have been established within larger corporations, factory-type settings, et cetera. So it can take a different look depending on the agency and the program model. Many of those have slowly shrunk in number because they were paying a sub-minimum wage. Now, our agency's expectation is those programs would support a person at minimum wage or greater. So a lot of the agencies are getting away from that model and going into that more individualized supportive employment model. We also have our day support options, or our DSOs, that is abbreviated. Those are larger program models, higher ratios, individuals and staff. They do a lot of community inclusion. They might do some work component, some don't. They do some volunteering, work on ADLs, communication, etc. We also have a new service called Transitional Employment Services. It was Transition Services. They just rebranded it Transitional Employment. Again, referencing the employment component. It's about 3.5, 4 years old of a service. They are restructuring that to really get people to think while they're in that program model, it's supposed to be a short window, that they're making milestones each year and progressing through that service model so that they would be able to go out, re-engage BRS and look for that competitive job by the time they start and end that service model over a 3-year span. So it's been rebranded. They're looking to tier it and hopefully expand upon that as we expand upon our employment messaging. We always want people to challenge themselves, be challenged by their support team to strive for the program model that seems maybe unobtainable. We have many individuals who are working wonderfully in community jobs. We have a lot of frontline workers who are DDS individuals supported by our agencies who worked throughout COVID in pharmacies, in grocery stores, in the Home Depots, in the Walmart, all those frontline jobs that kept going through the height of COVID. Our workforce, the individuals who are in those jobs, kept going and kept working through it. They're dedicated employees. They did a phenomenal job, and they're still working in many of those locations. So it's really, if I can't stress enough, is start thinking early. What can I do today to challenge my loved one to build a skill that can maybe just keep multiplying to help them in a job one day? You know, if you look back in your own life and how you started doing volunteering, or if you started doing side work or a job in your local town, and how just kept on building and building and building and building, it can be done for everybody. So you just got to think outside the box a little bit and challenge schools. I encourage you, have a conversation with schools and challenge it. Challenge the transition programs. We don't have to always go from that location that they have already established to that location to that location. Think outside the box. Create a new pathway for your loved one and folks behind. How can you buy services in our system? Well, there's a variety of different ways. Many families it's easier. They already have a plan, whatever the case may be. They're just going to go right to an agency. They've identified an agency in their backyard. They love the agency. They've been doing recreational activities with them, and that's where they're going when they exit school. regardless of the service. Obviously, if that agency doesn't provide the service, then we got to find somebody else. But so going the traditional way of going to an agency is one of the primary pathways. Some families don't like the agencies. They want more control over the program that their loved one is going to be in. So we have a self-direction model that you can use where you become, or somebody becomes the employer of record, and you hire staff, you build a schedule Monday through Friday, or what that looks like for your loved one based upon the level of need funding. You become the employer, you design the program. So we have families who are doing that. We have individuals who are doing that. We have a number of self-advocates who are agency employees, but they're also supported by our agency. All our self-advocates are predominantly doing that self-directed model. They hire and fire and train their own staff to support them here at work in their roles as self-advocates, which could include transporting to and from the office and help them with doing some dictation or whatever it looks like, putting a PowerPoint together. They hire, train their staff based on what their needs are on the job. So it's a great example of how our own individuals do the self-directed model very successfully in our employees of our own. We do have agency with choice. It's not a very commonly used option, but it is an option in our system where, excuse me, families might identify Brian Smith. They want Brian Smith to work with their son. They've known Brian for years. Brian's got another job, but is willing to whatever. You can go to an agency and say, hey, we have an employee that we want you to hire and train and then assign to work with our son. So the agency with choice gives you a little bit of control of who works with your loved one. If you are bringing a resource, a person, a body to the table, they just got to meet all the employment expectations of that agency that you're asking to hire your contact person. So it's been successful. It's not commonly used, but we do have families who've had paras or persons who've worked with their loved one through the school years who know them, maybe are medical needs or behavioral needs, and they've worked very well with them. That might be an option. You know, I want the agency. I don't want to do the self-directing. I don't want to be an employer. But maybe if I go to the agency, if they have this agency with choice as an option, I can bring a staff resource right to them. They just got to pass all the employment checks and background checks and training, and et cetera. So you might be helping the agency out by bringing a resource to them, and you're helping your loved one out at the same time by having somebody assigned to them that already knows them in and out and can support them in the way that you know they should be supported. So it's a different, unique approach. Again, not commonly used. I might count like 2 or 3 off the top of my head that I'm aware of where that's happened. And it's usually been the situation where a family's bringing somebody from their educational life along with their family member into adult service world. Okay, you'll see on the bottom here, there is a DDS qualified provider list. If you go to our website, you'll be able to find that on the list or on the website. It's updated periodically. It's big. It's like 27 pages long. On the left-hand side is all the agency names and contact information, and to the right, it's a bunch of check boxes. And up on the top is all the agency, the services that they provide. So if there's a check in the box, they provide the service. No check, they don't provide it. Use the helpline. More importantly, use our transition advisor staff. And if you have a case manager, use the case manager. You can even look at that list with the special education teacher or the social worker in your school. They're pretty familiar with who's in your area. Just because that list says the agencies outside of your geographic area does not mean that they don't have a service or a program in your backyard. So talk to us, talk to folks in the school district, and find out who is in the area. And we'll be happy to give you those answers. We can't direct you based on your loved one to one agency. We can say, these are the 5 in your area. Let's go, contact them, go take a look at their programs. Might be some more virtual tours right now versus in-person tours, but start doing that research early on. We've had many families do that research early on, become very engaged in the recreational activities, some even on the board of the trustees or advisors of these agencies on top of it, and establish themselves within that organization. So when their loved one came out of school, they already solidified their plan that the agency was going to support them. And they were familiar with the agency just as much because they were engaged in a variety of different activities. So they already developed a comfort level being at different program options in buildings, etc. So check that list out. It's very fluid. We do have some agencies come on, some agencies come off. Some may not be taking referrals right now just based on capacities, etc. All right, so we're going to shift a little gears to talk about things to start thinking about beginning at age 18. And I'm going to correct that and start saying we got to think about this before 18. You might start taking some of the actions at 18, but you got to start thinking about this before. One is to connect with your DDS transition advisor, exploring your decision-making options through probate court and elsewhere. SSI or supplemental security income through Social Security. Connecticut Medicaid, Husky C through Department of Social Services. Talking to the BRS. If you're not engaged with a level up, should I be engaged with level up? If not, is my loved one on the pathway for competitive employment and adult VR when they exit school? Photo ID through DMV and register to vote. And now we're going to go into some of these. And if you go to our website and go to transition, there's a host of different resources on our website for transition in English, and some documents are also in Spanish. Some of the roles of our transition advisors, are to assist our students, families, and school systems, adult service agencies too, and our case management staff with planning of students' transition from that school program into adult life. As I mentioned with the U.S. District Court ruling, we have shifted our planning as of this fiscal year to start planning to receive each student exiting school on their 22nd birthday. So they are entitled under IDEA and based on that U.S. District Court ruling to stay in school program through that day before their 22nd birthday. And that is when we're planning to receive them for adult services or employment program. BRS also is shifted and receiving at 22. We're going to collaborate with other state agencies, BRS example, to ensure that all transition options are explored and presented to students, families, and school systems. We work with DMIS, we work with Department of Corrections, we work with BRS, as I mentioned. We also work with DCF. So you name it, we're interfacing with multiple state agencies. One person may have 2 or 3 different agencies attached to them or following. So we're working hand in hand and trying to come up with the best service plan and making sure each person is doing what they need to now, and each person is ready to do what they need to do when it's their time to take over responsibility. Don't get me wrong, we have hiccups, we have speed bumps along the way, but we try to minimize that as much as we possibly can for the student individual. We collaborate with our providers of adult services to ensure that students and families and school systems are knowledgeable on the various employment and day service options available. Our providers who are providing the services know what resources are available. They know it because they're providing it. But really reinforcing that employment message and challenging them to, yeah, they came in looking at this program, but we think this student, this individual really could benefit from going to that program. And here's why. And beyond that program, we want to see them excel into the next type of program. So we don't want to become stagnant, walk in the door, go to one program and stay in that program model the rest of their adult life before they choose to retire. We want to keep challenging. So they're going to be a great resource. I use our transition advisors, and I mean that in the nicest way, but they're collecting data for me. And that data is critical when I meet with our colleagues over at BRS to talk about each grad. And it's over 350, 400 every year statewide, roughly about a third per region. But we're talking about each of those graduates in each of those school districts in Connecticut. And what is their pathway? Are they going employment? Are they refusing to, or not interested in a job? yes, they came to BRS, but we found that they were not eligible at this time. So how is our system going to react based on all those decisions and outcomes? So we're having routine conversations trying to capture that data and know where each graduate is headed. Now, as we go on, decision making. Everybody's heard about guardianship. Everybody's heard about conservatorship, but those are not the only options. There is a committee statewide who is focused in on coming up with supported decision making and great educational opportunities for people to understand the variety of different options that are out there, not just guardianship and not just conservatorship. You, the individual, you as a family or caregiver or support system to that person are going to need to make some decisions as to what is the best for them. Is something more least restrictive, like just basic natural supports or power of attorney, or just having simple health directives or advanced directives, or a supported decision-making plan? Is that those more informal options, less structured, least restrictive, we'll use that language, are those options more appropriate for the individual? Or do we need to really go knock on probate court door and say, I need to apply for guardianship, or in a particular situation, maybe conservatorship? So you start making those decisions 16, 17, because if you're going guardianship, you can apply 180 days before their 18th birthday and get that process done. So it's heard, it's decided upon, you have a decree, and at 18, that decree is official. Until 18, you are still parents of minors, okay? You still hold that right. But at 18, they become age of majority, and they become their own decision maker. So we all have to start thinking about that for non-disabled and undisabled children. You know, what is that going to look like at 18? If anybody on this call has anybody who's going off to college, whether they're disabled or not disabled, huge with medical issues. Once they're 18, doctors aren't going to talk to you as parents. So thinking about that, like medical proxies and things along those lines, is kind of get your wheels turning. 18, age of majority, they become their own decision maker. You are no longer a parent of a minor and don't have those rights to have free access to health care or any of those decision making without having something in place or a written understanding of sorts. So our friends over at Disability Rights of Connecticut are one of the leading entities, along with a host of other state agencies, including ours, talking about the supported decision making and pushing this along in the pipeline. And we're hoping in the months to come that something more formalized will come out. Great education materials. We'll talk about that continuum of least restrictive to most restrictive. But more importantly, these other options for the disability community become recognized within medical offices, hospital ERs, and other locations where people have had to go and show a court decree from probate for guardianship. So again, going back to the more restrictive, the guardian and conservators, guardianship, you can apply for 180 days prior to 18th birthday. There are fees for these when it comes to guardianship and conservatorship. We at DDS are alerted whether you're with us or not, any applications for guardians. We have to do an assessment, so two professionals would do that virtually or in person, depending on where we are in COVID restriction land. We would do that assessment for the probate court, submit it. We do not attend probate unless the court orders us to do so. A couple judges in our state like to see our faces, so they order us to be there, the assessment team. But most just accept the assessment that's completed. It's reviewed by the judge as well as the attorney that's assigned to the individual for the process at the hearing. And then the decree is later issued with the ruling, whether it's going to be full guardian or limited based on the application. There's usually a 45-day window they give us from the time they send us the paperwork till they want the assessment, but we've recently experienced a lesser time of like 30 days, which can be cumbersome at times, but we do our best. Guardians, guardianships that are appointed for individuals who are severe and profound those only need to be reviewed as needed or requested by the court and or by the guardian themselves or team. But others, mild and moderate, would be reviewed every 3 years. The court would generate a review where the guardian themselves, as well as an assessment team member, would do a review for the court. May not require a hearing, might just be a paper process. Conservatorships is done a little differently. We do not get involved in conservatorships. That is done by a medical professional that's identified by the petitioner. There is a conservator of person and a conservator of estate. And conservators can be voluntary, where the person who is being conserved is in agreement. And then there's the involuntary option as well. Now you notice there's conservator of estate, but how does somebody manage finances under guardian? It's kind of implied that anything up to $10,000 a guardian can manage, and it's typically wages is typically that Social Security benefit they may be getting. But once it exceeds $10,000 that they might be managing, it's encouraged that they consider applying for guardian over finance as well. So there is a financial guardian component now in place, and it's been about 3 years since that has been added to the options. So definitely talk to the clerks in your local probate. They're a great resource. Disability Rights of Connecticut, another great resource with a lot of information on this subject matter. But start thinking about this 16, no later than 17, and come up with your plan of what you're going to do when that 18th birthday comes. Are you going to go with the least restrictive model or more restrictive to ensure your loved one is properly supported after the age of 18 when they hit the age of majority? Okay. Now, we intentionally set these slides up this way so that way it flows in the way you should do things. So you're going to make that consideration around that 18. What are we going to do to help with decision making? Get that in place. Then you can apply for Social Security, SSI, Supplemental Security Income. You can go on their website. You can call them. It's a benefit that is income dependent. So if you apply before 18, which you could, the households, the family income and assets all come into the equation. At the age of 18, the individual themselves is applying on their own behalf. Your household income and assets, regardless of them living with you, no longer apply. Okay, so their name is going to be on the application, not yours, even though they may live with you. Even though you may say they're going to be paying you rent or room and board or whatever the case may be, once they get the benefit, your assets and income no longer apply. It's just them. Okay. It could take up to 3 months for this determination to be made and the benefit to be awarded. If they are working, please, I highly encourage you, please make sure their earnings are reported to Social Security. It's critical. You don't want to assume that an employer is reporting them on behalf of your loved one, and they're not. And then Social Security catches up and there's a back payment due. That monthly benefit could go away for an extended period of time, depending on what that overpayment they've determined is. I remember back going probably 10 years or more, a gentleman I worked with, I was case manager at the time, well, probably 15 years then, in Bridgeport, and very independent, lived with his mom, worked in a local nursing home in food services, and they were not properly recording his earnings to Social Security, and he got hit with over $10,000 back payment. So you go from having a monthly benefit in addition to your wages to just having your wages. That created a massive fiscal strain on him and his mom, because they were relying on the balance of those resources to stay afloat in their low-income apartment. And so, I always, remember that story when I talk about this, because it's really critical. We push employment. We want folks to be employed, but always make sure that those earnings are being recorded, because this benefit is impacted based on earnings. There's a massive calculation that goes into this. So I'm not going to go down that road. I encourage you to do your research and talk to somebody who's an expert when it comes to Social Security to figure out that calculation. But we have individuals who were eligible for SSI, got SSI, got great jobs, no longer get SSI. They're making more money than they would have on the benefit, or a combination of having both. So always keep copies of your application. Now let me complicate something for you. There's another state agency, abbreviated DDS. It's Disability Determination Services. This other agency falls under the Department of Aging and Disability Services. So that master agency also has BRS that I've talked about, which we'll hear about in a minute. It also has BESB, Bureau of Education Services for the Blind. And it has this DDS as well, Office and Commission of Hearing Impairment, Deaf and Hearing Impairment as well. So there's a number of entities under that large agency header, but this other DDS is there. SSI will do a disability determination. They use the local state agency office to do that. So you'll be signing releases for them to obtain records so that a person can be reviewed and determined disabled, meeting the criteria for this Social Security benefit. That same determination is used to determine somebody disabled for a Medicaid program as well. So if you are going to go through probate or any of those processes, great. When you go to apply with your loved one for SSI, you're going to need to provide some of those court documents that authorizes you to do so. Disability Determination Services does a disability determination. They deem them disabled. You start getting the benefit. Wonderful. Now you apply for Medicaid. That disability determination is now used for that application for that state managed program. So it just kind of flows as you go in this order. If you do it in this order, it tends not to get bogged down in bureaucracies or application processes, but it can. And that's where we come into play in helping you with completing the applications up front, making sure they're good to go. And if there's any hiccups, especially on the Medicaid, we do have embedded staff who can assist with that. They may do a look back on finances, so be prepared for that. 3 to 5 years for SSI. They may do a look back on 3 to 5 years for Medicaid. So if you have a loved one with assets and you want them protected, think about special needs trusts. Think about ABLE counts. And make sure those dollars are moved in a timely fashion before you get to this by 13, the latest. Tell your family, do not put anything in your wills or everything going to our family member who has a disability that could affect their state and federal benefits. We've established a special needs trust, direct anything to there. We established a ABLE account, direct anything to there, but do not have a cash payout to our loved one because it will disrupt some things for them. Husky is operated, Husky C is Connecticut's Medicaid program, which is operated by DSS. Much more lengthy application. And yes, you have to do a redetermination for Social Security. It's usually a 1-page front and back. How did you spend the money? Medicaid, it's like 19 pages. Most of it is done online now. So a lot of it is just regurgitation from the year before with some additional bank information and benefit information and paycheck information. This is what's critical is Social Security does have a higher asset limit than Medicaid. So this is the magic number is 1,600 that you want to keep your loved ones or your assets to 1,600 or less if it's for the individual. Okay. Yes, this is an insurance. Yes, you can keep your private health insurance through your employer for your loved one for as long as they allow for it. And we encourage you to contact them when they hit the magic age of 25 or whatever it is where that coverage may stop in your program to see if based on their disability, can they be grandfathered indefinitely while you are still covered yourself on that insurance. Some insurances will allow that. You just need to ask. Your private health insurance would be primary at that point, and this Medicaid insurance become a secondary. If they had Medicare, private insurance, and Medicaid, it goes through. Medicaid's always the last payee. So don't avoid going for Medicaid because you're worried it's going to impact your private health insurance, because it won't. All you're going to have is multiple cards in your wallet or your purse, and you're going to give those to the pharmacy. You're going to give them to your doctor's office, and their billing people will handle all that. Well, who's responsible for what? And once it gets kicked back, then it gets kicked to Medicaid and whatever's covered. So it just becomes another resource to you to help offset some of those potential out-of-pocket expenses, including pharmacy coverage. So you can apply for this again after that Social Security process, because you want to get that determination done so it doesn't put them on the wrong track in the Husky. Often the Husky applications, if they're applied for at the same time, they actually might get processed sooner than Social Security, and they get put on a wrong Husky track, and we got to undo that after Social Security is determined. So work on that Social Security first, work with us on that, and then get moving on the Medicaid piece. Again, once you get to Medicaid, the Husky C, then we can entertain assigning the case to a local office where we can start building a relationship with our case managers in that area, start some more of that planning. Now, I talked about BRS, and I'm going to jump a bit in slides here. We talked about Level Up services through BRS. This is under the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, also WIOA. So this rolled out, and they wanted to focus in on employment, pre-employment transition services for youth, now 16 to 22, because of that 22 mark. So they're looking at job exploration counseling. We're working at work-based learning experiences, counseling on opportunities for enrollment in comprehensive transition or post-secondary education programs. I just sat through a webinar last night and learned some more about those type of programs here in Connecticut. Workplace readiness training. And self-advocacy. So each district has a Level Up counselor attached to it. Get to know your Level Up counselor as early as 16. Make sure they're at your PPTs. Make sure the conversation about what resources the school has that Level Up might be adding to or supplementing in addition to. What does Level Up have specifically for the students in that school above and beyond? And start engaging in some of these activities. It builds the relationship. When I go back to our conversation about how we track those graduates, on my spreadsheet, and Jude and Jennifer from the other regions will laugh because in the West region, we use a whole lot of fancy colors so I can visually see where people are at very easily rather than going to the comment box. But the color for Level Up, a number of youth who are already engaged, BRS already knows about before we even start having the conversation for about their final year and a half, is increasing each year. So more and more youth in schools are engaging in Level Up services, which is great. And you know what? Through that experience, you may find that, competitive employment is not the pathway for that youth right now. They're going to need some additional skill set development. Can we build that into their IEP before they leave school? Is there a program that we can get through their transition plan in their IEP before they leave school to help enhance those skill sets? Or is this something that's going to, be long-term and we need to look at a different program model, 22 and beyond? So being engaged with Level Up starts that thought process of employment, starts working on those skill sets, starts everybody around the person and the person thinking about 22 and beyond, or even before that, about getting a job, working in their community alongside their peers in a local business. So I encourage you to really reach out to your contact in school, find out who your Level Up counselor is, and start that conversation, get to know them. Now, the Level Up services through BRS, as I said, is new to address a federal act that has created a number of other system changes for us. As I mentioned, BRS is under the State Department of Aging and Disability Services, abbreviated ADS. And I mentioned some of the other agencies that are below that. BRS does assist individuals with significant disabilities to obtain and maintain and advance in competitive integrated employment. Individuals who are interested in employment or are still possibly making a decision or encouraged to contact BRS within that final year that they're exiting special ed or exiting the school. And is recommended at least 6 months prior to that 22nd birthday that they make contact with BRS. Specifically, right now, the contact is Lynn Frith. She's in the central office for BRS, and she is the contact for all the youth coming out who are interested in employment or maybe still on the fence about employment. She is the point of contact. So that's her email and her phone number to have this conversation. And if the person is interested in employment, she notifies the region, and the BRS local offices start taking over and doing a review, a 511 review, to determine whether if they are competitively employable and on the track for adult VR, adult voc rehab. Every year since WIOA, in order to meet an obligation within the federal guidelines, a letter goes out from BRS and is co-signed by DDS. So in the West region, it's coming out from Lynn and myself. In the North, it's Lynn and Karen Sticklin, the Assistant Regional Director. In the North, my peer, and then my peer in the South is Greg McMahon. His name tends to be on the letter in the Southern region. So we're sending out this joint notification letter to families with a fact sheet every year. We're working on finalizing that letter for this year. This 22 has thrown a wrench into normal process. We're trying to figure out doing the mass mailing early on. Is that beneficial, or staggering it based on somebody's 22nd birthday, which would be something a little more complicated to manage. So we're working on those final details. So if you're getting into that final year of school, anticipate getting a letter. It very well will come from DDS on the envelope, but inside is going to be a joint letter from our two agencies about this subject matter, about employment, about 511, about WIOA, and engaging BRS and having a conversation with Lynn about the next pathway. Okay. And just to reference, we are constantly engaging with BRS. I meet with the regional director here in the West region once a month. Our transition advisors are routinely talking to the level up counselors, routinely talking to some of the adult VR counselors. These evening presentations that you're sitting through tonight, often schools will host these, and we're the two agencies talking that night, or there might be another agency or another one. So we're often at the table together messaging our collaboration and how we work hand in hand. If somebody is connected with BRS, that doesn't mean DDS goes away. If you're eligible for DDS services and you have a planned allocation based on your level of need and your pathway is for competitive employment, BRS would take the lead in that service development and plan. They would come up with a work employment plan around your loved one, around you, find a job, work with one of their certified rehab agencies, or CRPs as abbreviated, because we love abbreviations. To work with one of those in your local community, they would be contracted to do all that legwork and working with your family member, and BRS will support that. And then once it's determined, we found the job, this is the number of hours and this is the support they need, then they come looking at DDS. Can you sign off on this long-term support? And that's where that annualized allocation from DDS would come into play. If it's their CRPs, their certified rehab providers are vendors in our system, which is fantastic. So all the ones in the statewide that they have, we can continue services with them. You don't have to change service providers. So if they're able to continue on and do that long-term job coaching support and hand it off to a different department in their own agency, they can do that. So that's how we work hand in hand. Now, what happens if Brian loses his job? Knock on wood. What happens if Brian loses his job? Can we go back to BRS? Yes. Your team, your case manager, your loved one, the agency that was supporting them, we can reactivate that case with BRS to start that process over again. DDS's funding would just kind of slow down or freeze while BRS is working with your family member. So each case is a little different. There might be some DDS services happening on the days that BRS is not engaged. So I don't want to get too into the nuts and bolts of things, but that's where your case management team and the rest of the members of your team will build a nice service plan around while we re-engage BRS. So it's not a one and done. We can always go back to them. If you lose your job, hey, maybe they added more responsibilities and you're struggling. We can go back to BRS for intense job coaching supports. Maybe a manager change. Personnel changes can often disrupt the flow of a business, and you're struggling. Might be able to re-engage BRS on that and trying to work through some of those system changes that the employees struggling with some intense job coaching supports. And maybe it's found that the job is just not a match after success for several months. Something changed, can't figure it out, can't put the nail on the head. We need to find a new job so we can re-engage. So we can always go back to BRS. As I mentioned, the other additional tasks: apply for a state ID. You'll probably have school IDs for your loved ones or for yourself. Try to go to DMV and get the non-driver's license ID. Having run vaccine clinics hosted by some of our agencies and promoted by our agency recently, the number of youth coming through for their COVID vaccines that didn't have a photo ID was pretty alarming to me. No passports, no state IDs, not even a school ID because they're no longer in school. So I really encourage that. It's a great resource to have when traveling in a situation like this where there was a need for ID verification for a vaccine. But if you're going to be going into the world of employment, you're going to need that ID for the employment records. When you hit 18, yes.
Hey, Brian, I just wanted to cut in real quick. If you feel you have an individual and you dread the idea that, like they might have to wait in line and they'll never be able to tolerate it, call your DMV office and explain the situation. Yes. And see if you can get an appointment. Okay.
Yeah. So we've actually, thank you for bringing that up. We've actually had a situation where a family reached out to our local state rep, state senator, who navigated with the commissioner at DMV to somebody who is extremely behavioral. Was no way of going into DMV at any hour of the day other than pre or after it closed. So the legislator worked with the commissioner and the local office manager, or whatever their title was, I apologize to them, to make an accommodation to go in on a morning prior to its opening to get that taken care of. So there's ways around. But going through the normal process like you and I all would, now it's appointment time, so it's a little easier. I found it easy because I had to go to DMV last month myself. But doing the appointments, it just flowed a lot easier. It wasn't as packed, it wasn't as crazy. But definitely, I highly encourage you to consider getting that. It's a great tool to have for them. Register for vote. You're 18. You're eligible for voting. And on your Medicaid application that is discussed, it's an option. You can go to your local registrar of voters. You can go online, the Secretary of State's website, and do it there as well. So, and there's no charge for that application. I know I have a little bit of time here. So, life course planning. I'm not going to get into a lot of this because this is a totally different, another hour and a half, maybe 2 hour conversation. But Laura and I have been working on a work group with the statewide transition task force committee on a person-centered person-centered planning crosswalk, and trying to look at all the different models that are out there and coming up with a simplified tool so people can look at it, grab some information, click on some resources, and make a decision of what type of person-centered planning model works best for me, works best for my loved one. We here at DDS contracted, got a grant, and brought in life course materials into the state of Connecticut, and many other state agencies have recognized it. Some of them are actually using it as well. Our friends at CERC, along with the area RESCs, the RESCs being CES in Trumbull, at Advance in Litchfield area, ACES down in the greater Hamden, New Haven area, Learn, EastCon, and CREC. I think I got them all. I usually forget one. It took me a minute to go around the state. But all those area RESCs are hosting one-day trainings in support of State Department of Ed, as well as CERC, and making these trainings available for life course planning. It's an overview. It's not a full-blown hardcore training all day, but it gives an opportunity for everybody to learn about it, learn about the tools, utilize some of the tools, individuals, students, families, professionals, all in the same room or all in the same virtual platform, learning at the same time. DDS is actually embedded several of the tools from Life Course into our individual plan document. So you will see that if your loved one is eligible for DDS, when they get an IP, the IP has 1, 2, 3. I think it's 3. And somebody correct me, feel free, call me out on it. The personal profile, the star, and the trajectory specifically embedded into our individual plan. And it promotes the person back into the plan, getting their voice, getting their vision for themselves. And so that way we can see and hear what their trajectory is, their desired trajectory, who are their supports in their life, and where do we need to beef it up? Where do we need to add more? That part is okay, but we need to really add more over here and here to make this trajectory go the way this individual wants. So you're going to start hearing more and more about this as you become more and more engaged with us through just our service planning process. If you notice early on in one of the slides where that eligibility square was, well, the square next to it is Life Course. So you feel free to click on that. It's a wealth of information in our website, and it clicks you off, I also believe, to the national website for Life Course as well. Presently, there's an ambassador training series that folks can go through. There is a number of individuals statewide, DDS and non-DDS stakeholders who are ambassadors. Presently, DDS has about 12 people going through the ambassador training, and I'm a part of that, as well as several other administrative colleagues. Our commissioner is also going through this ambassador training. So we've had a number of people come through the ambassador training from other ranks and areas of the department, and now it's a top-down push and messaging. We've had folks from business office to quality to training. Our commissioner, as I mentioned, various assistant regional directors, supervisors at various levels are participating in this. So it's the messaging is Life Course, person-centered focus in all our activities. So I encourage you to take a look at it. And if you see a flyer that's been pushed out, whether through CPAC or other resources that you're tied to for a Life Course training opportunity hosted at one of your area RESCs, I encourage you to do that. And they do offer them in Spanish. They're not as offered as frequent, but they do have an offering in Spanish. You can probably take a look at CERC's website to maybe see when the next one for that is. Some other resources we talked about early on, I mentioned Social Security, Department of Social Services, specifically Husky, insurance, the Autism Spectrum Disorders Program is under them. Katie Beckett waiver, we do have a number of families who might be on that waiver, and that particular waiver was designed in the name of Katie Beckett to help families who have extreme medical care costs associated with caring for their family member. And it helps waive those asset limits and gets them on Medicaid to help with covering of those care needs. So we do have a host of families who are on that waiver. That waiver is slowly expanding, and there is a waiting list. So if you are on that waiver and you're connected with us, we have a conversation with you on a one-to-one basis about the timing of coming off of that and going on straight Medicaid. And it ultimately becomes a family decision at that point. Community First Choice is a program offered under DSS, often tapped into by families who are struggling with finding consistent home care authorized through Medicaid. It gives them an opportunity to apply for this program and get some resources assigned to them through a fiscal intermediary, kind of like that self-directed model I talked about earlier in DDS, but it's focused in on some in-home services based on a needs assessment that they complete. It is a bit of a lengthy application process. Early on, it was pretty quick, and then they did some reassessment of everybody in it, and that kind of delayed new applicants while they sorted out all the ones, the individuals already getting the program and services. But as a state agency, we encourage families to take a look at all the different programs that are available. You do need to be on Medicaid for that A, C, or D in order to be able to access the Community First Choice program. We talked about Department of Aging and Disability Services, specifically Level Up and Bureau Rehab Services and BESB. What I didn't mention is BESB will do basically the same thing as BRS, but It's designed for folks with visual impairments. So BRS would not be involved with a youth who may have a visual impairment or is blind. BESB would, and they would assist, and we would collaborate with them on transition services and planning around their exit from the school system into employment, et cetera. So they do have some additional workers there. Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Connecticut Behavioral Health Partnership, Beacon Health, is becoming a very large entity. If you do have a loved one with autism, you can reach out to them about their autism services. If you are getting any in-home services from any state agency, because Beacon Health, you tend to have to use the Medicaids or you're tapped into DSS, let us know, because some of the services you might be getting for your loved one on a regular basis in-home might help us plan for them differently later on in life. Okay, if you are getting services for Beacon Health, we here at DDS really want to know what those in-home service model, what are you approved for that the staff to come in your home, or the BCBA, or whatever the service might be. So let us know, because those services, the dollar figure attached to all that service plan, we can take that and start looking at how to plan for your loved one differently for when those services end, and so that there might be a continuation of some of those supports. So talk to us, and we'll work through those conversations on an individual basis. Bureau of Special Education and EdSite, their link on their website is fantastic. There's a host of transition resources on the BSC's website. I encourage you to take a look at it. They've redesigned it. Alicia Tracus is one of the key spearheads around that, their consultant around transition. So we really encourage you to take a look at their website and a variety of resources available. Some additional resources that our transition advisors came up with, and I want to tip my hat, because this, outside of a couple revisions that Brian made, this was predominantly drafted and developed by our statewide transition advisor group. We looked at the 5 different versions that were floating out there that people were using, and we meshed it into this presentation. So hopefully you found this very helpful and informative. And for the 3 who are on this call, you want to tip my hat to you 3 and all your peers for helping get this off the ground and completion. Disability Rights Connecticut, we mentioned that earlier. Great resource for Connecticut citizens. Take a look, reach out to them. They have a host of information that, whether it be issues you're having with your school district, to the guardianship conversation, to supported decision making, they are involved in a lot of things when it comes to those Connecticut citizens who have disabilities and their loved ones and their care providers. CPAC. I'm not going to go on that. We'll let Laura take that show. But CPAC, great resource for families. I highly encourage people, if you, obviously you're connected to them because you're here on this presentation, but you know of another family who knows of another family, get people connected, get people supported by just doing that, and encourage folks to reach out and tap into some of these resources when they're struggling with something, because there's going to be somebody, another household that went through the same experience, who can help you walk through what they did and have a more similar outcome, successful outcome, hopefully. Connecticut Family Support Network, another great resource for families. They have a host of different things on their websites. They have a new director, and as a result, there's a new area person in my region, because the director, Melissa, moved from my region to the director role. So there's been some changes over there, but that didn't stop their flow. They have a wonderful camp resource guide on their website. I encourage you to take a look at it. And the one nice thing about CPAC and CTFSN, and in some cases Disability Rights Connecticut, the person answering the phone is somebody who has lived a similar experience as the caller. And I don't live that experience on a daily basis. I've been in the agency, as Laura mentioned earlier on private sector doing services, but the call by a family and being received by another family at one of these agencies, there's a different connection. and there's a different layer of understanding, compassion, support that you can't replicate if you're not living that situation yourself. So I tip my hat to all my staff. They do a phenomenal job, but we can't do what our colleagues over at CPAC or CTFSN do, because many of us aren't living that experience as a parent or as a caregiver. We're living it as a professional, and it is a different feel. That conversation can be very different from a parent to a parent than a parent to a professional. So they're a great resource. Tap into these three. I really highly, if you haven't, just go on their websites, reach out to them, get in touch with their distribution list, because there's a wealth of resources that get pushed out. Autism Services and Resources in Connecticut, another great entity. CERC, I mentioned them and their collaboration with the area risks on the life course planning and a number of other training opportunities for families and professionals. Brian, why Office of the Healthcare Advocate? Do you realize how many staff are in that office? Is like 14 for the entire state. They're all medical professionals by trade, and they are there for every state person, non-disabled and disabled, to help you navigate some of the craziness in the medical insurance world. Reach out to them. If you're getting stonewalled by your insurance provider about a coverage on a service or a piece of equipment, reach out to them. Share your healthcare information. What do you have? You have this. You have 3 different insurance. Okay, let's sort through who's responsible, based on your coverages. And they will help you sort that out. I use the experience of my father. I told him, I learned about Office of the Healthcare Advocate through work. He was having an issue with a medical bill. It wasn't getting anywhere, frustrating him. I said, call the Office of the Healthcare Advocate. That's what they're there for, to help you navigate some of these things. Within a month, it was resolved. They were able to identify that it was a billing error being done by the medical professional that was triggering the bill. And it should have been zero payment based on the service that was provided. And the medical professional's billing office couldn't figure it out. But it took somebody outside of this situation to look at it holistically. Okay, what is it? And piece it all together, and they've identified that's what it was. It might not be that something simple for your situation, but they are a fantastic resource to all Connecticut residents. I encourage you, if a situation arises, reach out to them. And many families have, in your situation, might have gotten an answer you didn't like, and you might have gotten an answer you like, but you heard it from a party that's not the insurance entity on the other phone or somebody else, your neighbor, somebody professional who has a greater understanding around the insurances. Surrogate parent program, and there's a host of recreation and leisure activities through DDS, Best Buddies, Special Olympics, various camp programs, etc. As I mentioned, CTFSN does have a pretty substantial camp listing on their website. CERC at one time also had one that was more comprehensive and much larger because it covered the entire state and all camps. So now, you talked about transition advisors, Brian. You gave me the helpline information too. So if you're here in the North region, well, I'm not even in the North region. These, and I'll go through, there's 3 sides, one for each region. So these are the current contacts and names and phone numbers and emails based on your towns. I'll set this up there so I know this is being recorded, so I'll click really fast.
Brian, while they're looking through that, I just wanted to throw in one more thing. I encourage a lot of the people that I deal with that you check in with your local police.
I think we lost you, Jude. Check in with your local police. Is that where you're going as far as notifying them about your disabled loved one in your household? Yep. And I know there's been a big push in the autism community about having a special envelope or a folder, especially if they're drivers, having that available in their glove box. So when they hand over some of those important documents to a law enforcement officer, it kind of flags them that they have autism, the driver has autism. So I'm going to click to a South region. That was Jude, whose voice we heard, and Jude is in the South region. So I'll let this sit up there for a minute. If anybody has any questions, Ashley, Jennifer, Jude, was there anything in the comment section, chat area that we need to take a look at?
I do have.
Hi, Brian. Yes, there was one question. How does DEMIS collaborate with DDS? This person was thinking of a few students with ID plus serious mental health concerns, such as severe OCD or schizophrenia.
So our collaboration with DEMIS tends to be a little more complicated at times. We often, the greatest experiences we've had is when we're able to work together, looking at the person and what their clinical needs are. We don't have the clinical resources in DDS where DEMIS does have the clinical resources. So in some cases, we've developed a partnership with them where they provide that clinical support role through their established systems, where we provide the services for residential or the employment or day. And then we make sure that they access those clinical resources through DEMIS. So it might be a community-based referral that DEMIS carries for a bit, and then they refer it to a community provider. That's one example where it has worked. In some cases, it might be working with Department of Corrections, DEMIS, and DDS on a discharge plan for an inmate coming back into the community who does have mental health needs. So we might be working in collaboration with DEMIS on that support component, and then we come into play with some of those other resources that they need to successfully reintegrate back into the community and be successful and don't re-engage in unlawful behavior, shall we say, or are re-accessing illegal substances, et cetera. So it could take a host of different looks. I'm not going to lie, and they would probably say the same thing in a presentation. There's at times that our own systems create conflict because if they have intellectual disability, DDS is responsible. And sometimes they don't see that the mental health diagnosis is contributing to where the person is functioning right now. We need their clinical expertise and support. So there could be some oftentimes difficult conversations. But at the end of it, we try to get the best outcome for the individual in looking at what services we have in place. I mentioned our psychologists earlier on and how their roles come into play. This is another example where some of those regional psychologists might come involved in working through those negotiation conversations with our friends at DEMIS. So they've been open and hearing some more and more information. We did a presentation on our enhanced family support program that's built around our family support workers. They're aware of that and messaging some of that as well through 211. So it's really unique and it's case by case, but we try to do our best when it comes to pulling in all the community resources that best support the individual. And that includes other state agencies that might have that resource that the community doesn't have and that we don't have. And an example is DEMIS when the person does have addiction issues or concerns or mental health diagnoses.
We do have a couple more questions, one in the chat and one from Facebook. But before I do that, I'm going to launch a poll just to give us some feedback. So I'm going to do that now, and then I will ask the question. So as far as the question is in submitting an application, is it best to mail it or email it given COVID?
So COVID, they were working remotely, the eligibility unit, but they were going in regularly. So there was a minor delay in processing, but the applications slowed down pretty significantly during COVID because as many of us lived that experience back in the spring and early summer, there wasn't much activity. Trying to get records from schools to even process eligibility was not easy. So overall, they've been going in and out, working remotely, going in, grabbing, processing, and reviewing. So all in all, there hasn't been a major delay in that process. What I would say is always, any of these applications we talked about, whether you're applying for DDS or applying for Social Security or applying for Medicaid or applying for this program, that program, keep copies of these applications. Because if you're ever denied something, you can reflect back to the application and the materials you submitted, okay? And you'll notice through the slides, it says keep copies, keep copies, keep copies. Always keep copies, because if you have to appeal, you have an exact copy of what you gave us. I would always personally, if it was me, never fax it because those faxes go into our email system. So it's not going to sit at a traditional fax machine. But what it will do is it could get broken up into multiple emails, and trying to sort through that application based on its size and coming in multiple emails, it could be cumbersome. So I would highly encourage communicating with them through email, trying to get a secured email to which you can scan it, attach it, and send it to us, or send it US mail, UPS, FedEx, signed, certified, however you'd like. And send it to our Hartford office at that address that's listed on the website. It will get to them. They will receive it, and they will process it.
Great. Another question was regarding IQ. At one point, this individual tested below 69. It was around 69, and then it was 70. So should they appeal, and what new additional information should they send?
So how old are they now? Does a rough
Does not
estimate?
say.
Okay. All right. So if they applied and they were denied because their IQ was greater than 69, and now there's new evidence that's been provided through additional cognitive testing that their IQ is functioning at 69 or lower, and it was captured prior to 18, they can reapply. Okay. Just because you were denied eligibility does not mean you can never reapply. We've had some individuals who were made eligible and later tested out, and we have others who tested out early on, and as they progressed through the lifespan through schooling, the deficits became increasingly more prevalent and through the cognitive tests and adaptive behavior. So you can reapply. The key is making sure those reports are being captured in the developmental period prior to 18. If they come in after 18, can you reapply? Yes, but because the testing is not falling inside that developmental period, that could be called into question by the eligibility unit.
Okay, great. So I think this individual, it went from 69 to 70. So I'm hearing you say just provide any information that supports the deficits. Yep. Okay, a no question just came in. Why apply to SSI before Husky? Is it true that an autistic person age 15 and the question mark? So the person is 15 years old, and why apply for SSI before Husky? I'm assuming they're talking about Husky C.
Yep. So any state or federal benefits, if you apply prior to the age of 18, your household income and assets will have to be included in that application. So when we're talking about transition and when they hit 18 and their age of majority, they're applying on their own behalf at 18 for those programs. So the key about applying for Social Security first is, in part, it gets you a cash assistance through SSI to help offset some of those living expenses. But also, if they're deemed eligible for that based on disability, that disability determination is then used by DSS during your Medicaid application process to determine them disabled for the Husky C program. So we have you go that route to ease those determination processes for eligibility. We've had folks not be eligible for Social Security or didn't do Social Security and gone Medicaid, and it might require a full medical evaluation. It's a pretty lengthy packet that needs to be completed. One, and two, they might be put on Husky D, which is for low-income adults, which in our system can create complications and being able to assign a case manager. So that's typically the process we encourage people to go. And if they go that process, it tends to go relatively smoothly with some hiccups along the pathway. It's never smooth, but it tends to get you the benefit. It tends to get you on the right Husky track. And then in DDS world, we're able to entertain assigning a case manager and getting that relationship building occurring at a local level.
Thank you for answering my question.
You are welcome.
I'm the one who just asked about, I guess there's multiple Husky things. My son's only 15 and we're new to the state of Connecticut. So I'm trying to learn what order to do all of this. So
Yes.
we're talking about SSI once he's 18.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thanks a
No,
lot.
no need to apologize. When I was a case manager, I had a young man who I worked with who was about 6 years of age. He was getting SSI. And that was in part because his parents' household income and assets were below the thresholds allowable. So he was eligible for the program because of that. And he was also on Husky because of that. But welcome to the world of Connecticut. And Husky does have A, B, C, and D. So there is various tracks in the Husky Medicaid program. So depending on your personal situation, if you have private health care, et cetera, then really you're looking at that 18 mark for your loved one with autism to apply for one of the Husky programs. Okay. Any other questions, Laura, on Facebook chat? To my transition advisors, was there anything?
There is one about Social Security, whether individual has a developmental disability. If mom's income does not qualify them for any of the state insurance, will SSI approve on behalf of the benefits for the needs of the child? I was just going to respond. It's income based, even though the child may have a qualifying disability. If the family's income is over that threshold, they will not get SSI. So I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that, Brian.
So again, I use that 18 mark, but there's let me just add a layer of confusion. Social Security does have another program. It's SSDI, so Social Security Disability Insurance. So some youth may be eligible for that program based on a deceased, disabled, or retired parent. And that program is based on their work history. So if they have a parent in one of those three categories, they might be eligible for the SSDI benefit, which would get them a larger monthly benefit, number one. Might not make them eligible for SSI because of that. That work history that the parent had that the disabled child would be earning off of might be low where they're eligible for both programs. I had a young man who that was a situation. His mom passed away early on in life. Her work history was minimal, so he was eligible to collect on both of those Social Security programs as a result. But once you're on the SSDI program for 2 years, that youth, regardless of age, is now eligible for Medicare. So they can go on Medicare as well. So depending on each individual circumstance, the Social Security benefit path might be different. Typically, it's the SSI route, but every now and then we do have those situations where it might be an SSDI situation. And in those situations, they might push them over assets for Medicaid, which might put them on the Husky D track or make them put them into a spend down situation. So it's an unavoidable frustration that we experience based on some of those Social Security decisions. But it's usually associated with the SSDI, not the regular SSI program.
Let me just see if we have any questions on Facebook.
Yes, to elaborate, could you apply for SSI and the child's only 2 years of age? I'm sorry. Yes, but your household income and assets would come into the decision-making process. And if you meet those thresholds, your child very well could be eligible for SSI. So I would consult Social Security directly on that to see if it's applicable for your family situation.
We had a lot of questions in the chat and also on Facebook. Is this PowerPoint presentation going to be available?
Yes, at a later date.
You can just email it to me and I can email it
yes.
out. Okay, great.
And again, compliments to the staff who pulled us all together. We've been doing a number of revisions to several of our documents. And this was one of those situations, and everything that we pull together, we try to push through our central office and our executive team. So there was a couple things they wanted me to update, which have been updated. This PowerPoint was the first go around with all those revisions. So the three transition advisors on here are just seeing it for the first time after the revisions recommended. And I'm waiting for the final blessing, shall we say, from our executive team in central office. So once it is, then we'll be able to disseminate that to you, and I'll share that with you, Laura.
Wonderful. And folks were asking about your contact information.
Sure. I will try to put it into the chat right now.
Hey, Laura, would
Yes.
they be able to, you're going to have this up somewhere?
Yes. I think we lost Jude.
Yep, Jude's on and off. Jude's on and off. Okay, I'm going to put my name and title and contact information. I encourage the utilization of email. I apologize. Our state email system can be frustrating at times when it goes into the secure mode. But with working remotely and other things, email tends to get me faster than the voicemail. So, but feel free, if you're more comfortable on the phone, leave me a voicemail and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can.
Okay, I'm just gonna, Jude wanted to know if this recording was going to be available for everybody. Yes, we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel, probably in about a week or so.
Okay. If there's any other questions, you can come off mic or dump them in the chat. I know we're about over time if I seeing that correctly. Feel free to take down my contact information. Again, thanks Jude, Ashley, and Jennifer for coming along and fielding some of those questions for me.
Yes, thank you to everybody.
And I really appreciate everybody's time this evening and listening and gathering this information. And Laura, thank you for inviting us to be here and hosting this event.
It was our pleasure. It was a wealth of information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. That being said, I think we're done and want to say good evening to everyone. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.